Hello and welcome to a special episode of Film Ireland Presents. In a short while, I'll be chatting with the Problem with People director Chris Cottam. And we are delighted to announce that this podcast is sponsored by Crewless, and they are the easiest way to hire Ireland's best freelance crew. Their brand new update helps you stay revenue compliant while hiring freelancers, protects your producers with automatically generated contracts, and lets you pay and get paid securely on the platform, so you've no more keeping track of all your invoices or chasing the unpaid ones, which is very, very handy. So make sure to visit crewless.ie to learn more and get started today. Now, first, I'm here with the Problem with People co-stars, executive producer and national treasure Colm Meaney, as well as the charming and talented producer and co-writer Paul Reiser. Now, having listened to the trailer here...
Did I ever tell you about me grandfather?
And the brother?
As close could be, until his brother sailed to America and they never spoke again. I want you to find our American family and make things right.
All right, Dad.
Now! I want you to call them now.
Hello, not interested.
Hello, I am your cousin, Ciáran.
And he wants you to just go to Ireland. What's the worst that could happen?
Cousin Barry from America. Dad, your great nephew, Barry.
Never thought I'd live to see it.
The good Lord granted Fergus such a full life.
Till the American arrives.
Jesus, your father left half of everything to Barry.
Who's to say that my dad wasn't still alive when Barry entered the room?
You need to tell him about the will.
Can you believe the balls on this guy?
Why should this asshole keep your half?
Okay, I want you to look something up for me. It sure is lovely here, which is why I decided to build here. Huh? Slunt ya.
You dirty.
You want to play games with me, pal? Bring it on.
We'll see about that.
Oh, yeah, we will see about that.
Up against the car, please.
Hey, that's certainly not legal.
You are petty and angry at everyone but yourself.
Jesus Christ.
Shame.
Sneaky feckin' bastard. I don't think I'm petty.
I've a bunch of questions about how the project has come to fruition, but first I think I'd really like to know about, you met coming on board this project. What was it like building rapport to get it so natural on the day?
Well, we didn't have to build rapport. It was. I mean, you know, Paul sent me the script. I read it. I loved it. I said, yes, I'll do it. And then 3 years later, we met. You mean we texted and we Zoomed or whatever, FaceTimed, whatever, and a few times. But it just took a while to get the film set up. And we met here in this very hotel one evening over a pint.
And we never even chat about the movie. We just were just going off with books and politics. And it was wonderful that we got along so well, and I kind of suspected we would, and knowing his work and knowing his thing. But if we hadn't gotten along, that would have worked fine too, because the characters are trying to get along, or they do get along and then they don't. And I thought, you know what? If it turns out that we don't mesh, that's going to be funny too. But luckily, we had a great time.
And sort of casting and developing that's something that you would work as producer in tandem with Chris and getting right? Is that like a co-decision? Was that like Chris's shout? In casting?
In that, no, you know, you're thinking about it and you go, somebody who could be my cousin, Ireland. Colm Meaney, done. You don't have to go.
You do see it, yeah.
No, they thought of Colm, and I thought that's going to be really just felt right. And to his credit, our director, Chris Cottam, his sort of mission statement to himself for the production was, we've got to get this right for the Irish audience, you know, and let's avoid every cliche and every misstep. And, you know, so yes, it's a small little village, but it's not the 1400s. It's not necessarily thatched roofs, and there are no leprechauns. You know, let's make it real. So that fact that Colm responded, I went, okay, we're we passed the first test.
Yeah, I loved seeing Patrick in it. He's just fantastic from Redemption. And again, I think it is the casting was modern. I think also there's some of those in-jokes that I was like, if the person... Either like as executive producer, do you serve as a Irish consultant for some of those?
No, because when I read it, I just thought this is great. I mean, that was my big concern. When you read a script written by a non-Irish, we won't say American this time, but written by a non-Irish writer, you sometimes you can get a bit Paddy Wackery, Darby O'Gillish, and all that. And when I read it, I realised this is brilliant. This is representing the real Ireland of today. So I didn't have any of those worries or have to do any of that.
Yeah, and there was a blunt, again, like it would bring it back to that kind of banter and that back and forth bickering that I think is very, like, you're not saying the direct thing, you're talking around it, but you are overtly saying it, and that was very much so present the whole time in the script.
Yeah.
Talk to me again. So what I think is really interesting is you wrote this for Ireland. So you decided you wanted to write a film set in Ireland, and I think that's like, what was it about? It was Section 481. Was it our fabulous crew?
No, it started. In the movie we reference that my character loved the movie Local Hero, which is how this started. I saw Local Hero when it came out in 1983 in America.
That's Scotland.
Let me finish. And Scotland, apparently, did you know this? Totally separate country.
Yeah.
Not the same as Ireland.
Also a joke that's made.
Yes.
I'm not ruining it.
But so I just love that idea of an American going to a beautiful, picturesque little town. Somehow I said, Ireland. And then in the early 90s, I visited Ireland for the first time, and I just fell in love with it. I said, okay, I got to make the movie in Ireland. I had no story. I just had, I go to Ireland. Why? And then figured it out.
I like it, and there's elements of the field, but funny. The arguments over land, the Yank coming over, threatening the space.
Yeah, it was very different than the field.
Totally.
Yes.
It's like my left foot, but not quite the same.
So talk about that editing process then, in terms of, or the writing process in terms of, you have an idea. Do you do a one-pager and kind of like send it around to people and see? Is it something that you're like, okay, I have my slate of projects, this goes here, and when I have time, I'm going to, like, how do you kind of do your drafts working up to this?
Wow. That's
a good question.
Bunch of good questions. No, first of all, no, I don't show it to anybody. Because I'm not a big fan of input. Like, let me write it, and then afterwards you'll tell me and we'll do it. But I just had the idea, literally, that the idea was simply I wanted to go to Ireland, and I just played with it very casually for a couple of years, and then at one point I got serious about it. I thought I should probably write it with somebody to just bounce off ideas. So somebody recommended this writer, Wally, who co-wrote it with me, and it was a great collaboration. And I said, I'm going to Ireland. Why? Okay. Well, maybe it's a family. Okay. Why? And maybe there's a long-standing feud between the two sides of the family, and they're trying to finally broker the peace. And then that really appealed to me. I thought, well, now you've got a movie about something, about human nature, conflict, how do people resolve? So it's about something big, but it's told in a very small-scale story. It's two knuckleheads who are good guys trying to do something, good intentions, and it goes badly because we're flawed people.
And hilariously flawed. You're now quite prolific as a writer, and again, such a recognizable face. In terms of, would you consider yourself to be like a writer that acts or an actor that writes?
I don't know. One of the toughest things for me is filling out my form when you go to the occupation. I don't know, a whole bunch of things. I never like to pinpoint it. I actually only became a writer because I didn't know how to describe things. You have to just pitch it. Well, go into the big suits and pitch it to the network. Let me just write it here. Then you tell me. So, I started as a stand-up, and I still do stand-up comedies where you're writing for yourself. So that's where it really started. And the acting sort of came in second. I don't know if that answers your question.
Perfect. And I'm so sorry. So we're running out of time. I think
it's all right. But if you watch the movie,
and
you see me next to him, you'll say, "Well, that Reiser, he's no actor." So
I know.
Yeah.
And I saw another promotion that you've done for this that you had said Parked is one of the underrated films. I would argue that I think in Ireland that is I would be surprised that people haven't seen Parked.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just one of the most beautiful.
It was a terrific film. Dara Byrne, it was the first time director on that, and he's since been making a lot of documentaries. But he should be making features. Yeah, for sure.
So powerful. So everyone should watch this film and also watch Parked. That's what I.
Well, thank you very much.
And The Journey.
Thank you so much.
For those who
and
haven't
the
watched
journey,
The Journey.
Yes, of course.
This is the problem with people is the comedic version of The Journey.
Two
people trying to broker a peace.
Working those different acting muscles. That's brilliant. Thank you so much for chatting with us.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
That's how we should sell it.
So now we are delighted to welcome to the show Problem with People director Chris Cottam. Thank you so much for chatting with us. You are in Dublin at the moment. You're promoting this film, prepping your commercial and your next film, which is really exciting.
Yeah. I've been here for a couple of weeks. The film was released in the US last month, so we had all our premieres and screenings there. And then The Problem with People is being released here in Ireland and Europe and the UK, I think on November the 8th. So yeah, I've been here for 2 weeks doing a little bit of press. Paul and Colm are here, and I've been shooting some commercials, coincidentally. So yeah, I'm having a rather nice time. We were discussing about your very rich and very interesting career from commercials and music videos. You had mentioned this is your fourth feature. And again, like warm, heartfelt comedy, musicals. You don't shy away from any subjects, and travel documentaries. And that seem to have a real kind of warm themes to it. Can you tell me a little bit about the evolution of your career to date? Yeah, I mean it's quite interesting because I mentor a couple of younger directors, and you know it's often a question like, how do you get to the place where you're at? And sadly, it's so utterly random for most people that it's very difficult to carve out, or at least to sort of help someone say, well, this is the thing you should do, because it feels very, very random. And the only kind of combining factor in it is, you know, everyone says, oh, well, perseverance, and if you believe hard enough, it's not really that. It's kind of, it's a bit of happenstance and trying also to somehow control where it is you want to go, which is very difficult. So my general outlook on where my career's taken me is to not really say no to anything. Because by saying no, you instantly cut off an avenue that you don't know where that's going to expand to. So I started making short films at university when I was studying English. Weirdly, I had a desire to make films, but I didn't really. The option of going to film school wasn't really available. I didn't really know much about it. So whilst I was studying literature, I was also making English literature. I was also studying. I was also making a couple of short films. I managed to sell to Channel 4, and one of them was on what was then called the British Short Film Festival in the early 90s. And then I really started at the bottom. I wandered around London. I mean, it sounds very like ridiculously romantic, this, but I sort of literally wandered around London knocking on doors because the internet wasn't around. So it was literally knocking on a door in Soho saying, oh, do you have a job in the film industry? And they say, oh no, we're a bakers. I'm like, okay. And then I'd go to the next door, and I eventually got a job at an advertising agency as an office manager. And then from that, someone said, oh, there's a job going as a runner. And then I met my mentor there, who is this really fantastic producer called Michael Proudfoot, who gave me a chance. And then I met someone else who gave me a chance. There's a lot of people giving you a chance. And it's also an attitude of, as I say, not saying no to anything. And also fundamentally it being someone that people want to spend time with at work, because there used to be a lot of sayings, especially in the 90s, of like, you know, directors had this reputation of being very hard-nosed and very shouty, and they became quite famous for being quite aggressive, and that's not really within me. So I've always tried to look at my career as being quite open and accepting and accommodating of people and their opinions. And as a consequence of that, your sort of friendship circle grows as well, which again leads to more opportunity because you don't say no. So I hope there's some sort of thread of comprehension in that. So I'm kind of gleaming that the skills that probably benefited you the most that you picked up were like amiability, tenacity, like just keep going, yeah. And yeah, what other kind of attributes would you say, or things that you had to learn along the way, do you think is really important as well to have in your director's toolkit? I mean, how important would talent rank in there as well?
Yeah, it's interesting because I didn't go to film school. It, and I think a lot of people do this, and I think a lot of directors do this too, is they learn from being on set and they learn from being with directors. As a director, I don't spend that much time with directors because they're doing their work and I'm doing mine. But coming up that ladder, and it's quite a militaristic ladder that, you know, there are very specific ranks and roles. And having done quite a few of them, you know, being on set next to a really good director is the best film school, because you cover everything. You cover the theory of it, you cover the technicality of it. You get to see how a good actor interacts with a good director and vice versa. So you really is the sort of what my mother used to say was the university of life. And I spent the first good 15 years literally learning from other people. So that's where my technical and theoretical skill comes from. But yeah, fundamentally, it's about having a vision and being able to pull people along with you on that vision and keep them going with you, because it can be quite stressful. And so, as you say, amiability can be seen as being a slight weakness. Is that sort of nice guys don't win sort of element. And you have to be assertive, but you can't bring people along with you on a journey if they all can't stand you. So I don't know. I'm not a great psychologist, but you know, I think it's a lot of it is to do with is wanting people to come with you on the journey that you're about to take.
And you have, again, you've worked in so many different fields and won awards in so many different fields. I think commercial directing and the creative world around that is so interesting because it is such a similar skill set, but you're telling like a very big story in a tiny amount of time, but you have a lot more resources, presumably, for most of them
Yes.
than you would on a feature film. Do you think working in that field has changed your or developed your style in terms of directing longer form as well?
Yeah, I've always interested in the connection between commercials and film, and documentary. And the way I approach it is that having done those different forms, and I consistently do them, so it's not like I used to do documentaries, I still do them, is that documentaries, you have to be editorially sort of astute, and you're making decisions about story on the spot. And that can be a very, very difficult thing, especially if you're in, you know, I remember being in Haiti with Ramesh Ranganathan doing The Misadventures, and it's fundamentally a comedy show about places that you probably wouldn't think about going on holiday to. And Haiti's a really difficult place. It's heartbreaking what's going on there, and you have to editorialize how can you make this funny and yet at the same time sympathetic. So that is like comedy with heart that's inclusive, and that's one thing that I really try and do in a lot of my work. And then you also have to work quite quickly. So on a commercial, a lot of people come and say, oh, there's a lot of time because you're only doing 8 shots in a day or maybe 10 shots in a day. But because I can editorialize quite quickly and I can make choices quite quickly, I actually get quite a lot of coverage on a commercial. And then the idea of playing with bigger toys on commercials then adapts to how I can make films, because I get to work with great DPs that I can then pull over to the film world as well. So it's all quite self-fulfilling. And what film does, it gives you a higher expectation of aesthetic, which you can then feed back into documentaries. So it's a really nice way. Each little discipline gives you tiny little things that you can bring into your work. And I really like that aspect of it, because I can be quite quick. I can editorialize quite quickly, but I can also make something look really nice.
Yeah, and I suppose that's it. You've told stories in so many different formats that you can really like cut through what will work at the end, what's there, and bring that kind of outside eye as well to it. In terms of, you were saying about the breaks that you have gotten along the way, what would have been your key, say the 1 or 2 or 3 moments that would have been like, actually this is a big step up for me, and how did you kind of approaching a project like that?
Yeah, there were two big moments, I think, that changed the course of what I was doing quite dramatically. And one was I made a documentary about an English photographer called Rankin, and we had great fun working together because we're fundamentally both kind of clowns. And whilst he's a very good photographer and he has his own business and he's Dazed and Confused and he's, got a huge body of work, we're both sort of silly little boys. And so when I made this documentary about him, he said, why don't you come and work with me and we'll co-direct? So that was the first step I got, because he had such access to huge clients because he had a very high profile. I was starting to learn the idea of bigger production quite quickly with way bigger clients commercially. And then so that sort of set me on a pretty interesting path commercially. And then my other biggest break, I think, was a film I made a few years ago called A Christmas Number One with Frida Pinto and Awan Rayon. And that came about because the producer was my boss like 25 years previously when I was a runner. And this comes down to sort of diplomacy, amiability, tenacity, is that she always remembered that I was kind of a good person to have on a team. And she'd sort of seen my career grow over 20 years. And it was that connection that she came back and said, I've got a script for you, which I think would be really good. And it ended up being Christmas Number One. So two big things that came out of two very separate areas. I literally used to make tea for this woman. And she'd always kept, it's called Camilla Deacon. She runs Lupus Films. But brilliant producer. And yeah, very, very grateful to her. Yeah.
And with the problem with people, with your other work, I think you said heartfelt was definitely a word that describes it. Do you see, would there be any other elements that you would kind of ascribe to your voice as a filmmaker that you would bring to projects that you would say, yeah, that's me, and that people would be able to recognize in your work?
My English tutor at university said to me, don't be scared of sentimentality, because I'd made a short film that was very funny, but I'd also really pushed quite a few sentimentality buttons. And he said, don't be scared of that, because I felt a little bit like, oh, I don't want to go into there. She said, no, it's really good. You've got to draw the audience in. You can do that through sentimentality and also embrace humor as well. So, I've sort of said it in the previous few minutes, but it's that idea of, I really like to laugh at things, but I also really quite like to cry at things. And I think if you can bring those two things together, that I suppose is what heartwarming is, isn't it? It's sort of, it makes you feel good and allows you to laugh. It's not too much. It's not taxing on you. And hopefully it's sort of, when you step out of either the theatre or you finish watching it on TV, you go, that was really lovely. I feel a bit better than I did when I started watching it.
That's all there in The Problem with People, is the humor and the heart and about human connection. Tell me about getting involved with this project. What stage was it at when you became attached?
So it was around about 2018, and my agent said, there's a script here from Paul Reiser. Do you want to have a read? And I was like, yeah, of course.
But like set in Ireland.
Set in Ireland. And I live in Los Angeles, and I was living in Los Angeles at the time. I was thinking, this seems very coincidental. I'm getting a brilliant American iconic actor and comedian sending me a script that's set in a country that I visit quite frequently and love. So it all felt a little bit too good to be true. So I read it and I really enjoyed it, and I laughed a lot. And then I read it again and still laughed. So it sort of passed the smell test. And then I said to my agent, I'd obviously love to meet Paul. So I went to meet him for a coffee at his house, and we got on. He's a very, very nice, open, charming, warm, lovely guy. So there's no prickliness, there's no spikiness about him. I didn't have to watch what I was doing or saying. So we had a really authentic, lovely conversation, and we kind of hit it off. And that was really the sort of birth of where the film came from at the start, because the script was already written. And then a few sort of interview processes and big speech marks. And finally, I was very happy that he offered it to me. So we started work on it. And it was sort of, the pandemic was kind of starting to raise its head. And there was sort of, like most films, money and finding actors and so on. But yeah, it's as we showed the screen, they were on the Late Late Show last night. And we're staying in the hotel in central Dublin. And Paul and I were in the elevator going up to our rooms. And he just said, we did it. And I thought that was lovely to say that in an elevator. We had a little hug before we went to bed. And it was such a lovely journey that seeing him and Colm with Paddy Keelty on the Late Late Show, it just shows that over 6 years it was just lovely seeing them talking about the film that we had made. And if you haven't made a film, it can be quite difficult to understand that because it sounds a bit over emotional. But it's a long journey. It takes a lot of time and a lot of work. So it felt like a real reward last night to see them both on the telly talking about it.
And tell me about then your process. So you've gone through that, say you've got the seal of approval. Was Max Brady, so the Irish producer, would she have been involved at that stage?
Yeah, she no, I brought Max on because she produces my commercials in Ireland. And I just thought that because she's again a very experienced, very tenacious, knows the lay of the land in Ireland for film. And I just thought I couldn't think of anyone better to do it. So I produced it with Max on the ground here and Paul. And it was a really, really tight team. And she really, I can't speak highly enough of her. It was a great sort of foundation to have in Ireland, to have this producer here for sure. And then I came in from the US, and then Paul, joined us here as well to start shooting.
Brilliant. And in terms of that, so you're bringing the team on board. You have your script. What's your next process? I mean, it's cast presumably already.
Yeah.
That like the main role. Like, do you then start like whittling down? Like, what? Like, would you storyboard? Would you cast first? Would you do table reads? How do you kind of then start to visualize and plan everything out?
I think after we knew we had the script and we knew it worked and we knew we could shoot it in Ireland, you really do start to sort of look at who you can cast. And the cast is entirely Irish, and you could sort of say, obviously, apart from the two people in it that are American, which is Jane Levy and Paul Reiser. So we have our sort of wish list, and obviously Colm's right at the top of that list, being the kind of, I wouldn't want to call him the grandfather of Irish film, but he's certainly an older relative. And so once he agreed to do it, you're sort of up and running, because it's an independent film, so it's a private investment, and all people that put money into films want to see is, do you think this film is going to be good? Because if you think it is and it'll sell, then we'll give you money. It's that kind of approach. So once we were there, the turnaround to landing and starting to prep and find locations and so on was pretty short. The 5 years before that, it's just a lot of chatting and script re-editing and thinking about cast and finding money and so on and so forth. But then the actual sort of, the term is to be green lit. Once you're green lit, then you're off and running pretty quickly.
God, and just one kind of question, slightly off topic of the film, but I do think it's interesting because you work in so many different areas and in so many different countries. And I know like things like France would have very specific labor rules, UK or the US less. So do you is there anything culturally different about working with an Irish crew? And it's great as well that it's crewed up local, but like, do you find there's, kind of different nuances on different styles of sets?
Yeah, there is. I mean, the Americans actually are very, very strict with rules and unions, very, very heavily unionized. So I'm part of the union over there. England and Ireland, which are the two other markets that I do most of my work in, I really like. I mean, I'll talk specifically about Ireland. I really like Irish crews because you really get a sense of them being committed to what it is that they're doing. And there's obviously two reasons why Ireland's so successful with film. One is because the crews are brilliant, but obviously there's this huge tax incentive as well. But I love working with Irish crews, and they just have an amiability about them, and they will push through walls for you if they think you're okay. And I've built up those relationships over the last few years. So, for example, I had lunch with the grip from the film, Paul San, who's a very famous grip here, and everyone who's listening will probably have known him or worked with him. And that's something that is unusual, to go and have dinner with the grip 2 years after you finish making the film, because he's now become a friend. And I probably would say that wouldn't be so expected in the US, for example.
You're so used to the way things are here, is like are there slightly different procedures, or things done in a slightly different way, or here that role maybe means something slightly different, or is it just uniform across?
I think it's pretty uniform. I mean, there's some of the word terminology is slightly different, which can confuse. I mean, because I'm English, and it's not so confusing for the Irish, but it's confusing for the Americans. The Americans say, "Let's roll the cameras," and I would say, "Let's turn over the cameras." And in America, when I say turn over, the entire crew just stands and looks at me, and I say, "Sorry, roll the cameras." So there's some terminology, but fundamentally, it's a hierarchy that still maintains its system and its uniformity. So it's a reasonably easy adaptation. I think the problem I have is it's not the embarrassment of being English, but I'm not an Irishman, and I'm making what's fundamentally an American-Irish film. So I'm always very flattered when people seem to, on the outside at least, accept me.
Oh, lovely. And again, like there were certain kind of words and terminologies used that I was like, that's very specifically Irish. Like, did you guys get, I often think like that level of understanding for those particular things, it's either like that person is married to an Irish person, or they've gotten someone in. And like, would there have been an Irish pass or anything like that for her?
Yeah, very definitely. It's a really good question, actually, because Paul was always very cognizant of not screwing it up. And he wanted to be authentic as possible. So we did have a pass from an Irish friend of ours who sort of adjusted some colloquialisms and some sort of word structures and sayings. And then on set itself, there's a great actor, Niall Buggy, who's in the film, who said this line. It was like a double negative. And me and Paul stood there saying, that doesn't make any sense. He says, no, but that's how we would say it. So we're like, okay, if that's how you say it, I'm not going to be able to say, well, no, it's not how you would say it. So again, a lot of the cast brought their turns of phrase and their word orderings a bit generic, but just put their stamp on it to make sure that it did feel like it was coming out of their mouths, and rather than Paul Reiser's.
And in terms of even sourcing the location, that parochial house is hilarious, and the car.
Yeah.
When does that kind of come into the mix? Is that something that's sort of sourced a really long time ahead? How long does it take to dress?
Well, so the house that Colm Meaney's character's father lives in was a house that we kind of stumbled across, well, the location manager found. And it was an old Irish farmhouse. The interior, at least, was an old Irish farmhouse near Blessington, and it literally hadn't. What you're seeing in that room where Des Keogh's lying in his bed in the kitchen is almost what we found. I mean, really, give or take a bit of propping. I mean, the top of the stairs, there's a little inset where there's the Virgin Mary. And I
was just going to ask about the statue. I was just about to ask
that was there. And the minute I saw that and I saw those stairs, because the stairs are a bit of a character for the first bit of the film.
And I liked the angling. It was kind of funny. It was askew, and you could feel like that level of stress emanating from the character.
Yeah, it's really funny, actually, because a lot of people have picked up on that. And it was something that's not in the script. It's literally, I saw these stairs with the Virgin Mary. I'm like, this has to be the place. So the interior was this basically derelict. I mean, it had literally old postcards from the 70s in it. And the chap who was the farmer was very happy to, we had to reinforce the floor because we were on the first floor. We had to reinforce with steel joints because it was a little sort of ropey, but it was done to proper
sagging in the middle, sort of.
I mean, basically, yeah. So that felt authentic because it was. And then the exterior was a different location by Blessington Lakes, and that was just a guest house on this huge plot of land that was just, I mean, it had never been used as a location before. So that was a great find. And then the car is I hid a few sort of Easter eggs in the film that if you're a proper film nerd, you'd go and try and find from the film Local Hero. Because when the reason Paul's character comes to Ireland is because his daughter, played by Jane Levy, says, it's a bit like that film, isn't it, Dad? Where the guy goes to Ireland. And then Paul's character says, no, he went to Scotland. He goes, yeah, no, but the same thing. And that's where you get a bit of a laugh. The Americans not knowing the difference. And Local Hero, I'd say I've put like, I think 5. I think I have to cut one of them out. But the car that Peter Capaldi drives in Local Hero is the car that we had driven by Colm Meaney's character. And there's a couple of other little, like the contractors in The Problem with People, Happer and Mac, are the 2 characters in Local Hero. So I just dropped loads of, and there's a little figurine in the pub in The Problem with People called Bella Marguerite, and that was the name of the boat that's being painted in Local Hero. And how Paul's dressed at the end is how the Peter Reiger character is dressed. So there's about 5, and even I can't remember them. But even the film I did before that, which is a rom-com, Christmas rom-com, I put about 6 different Easter eggs from Love Actually into that. And I don't know why I do. I just think it's quite fun for me because it's very difficult to spot unless you're really looking out for it. So like in A Christmas Number 1, I had the Colin Firth's brother who's caught having an affair with his wife. I made a record exec. And then one of the Santas in the sort of Robert Palmer, Bill Nye music video was one of the stylists. So just because I know these people. So it's just a great little sort of quiz. I should really keep track of them.
Oh, that's fabulous. Yeah, that needs to be on the IMDb trivia section of all of these. Anyone listening, make sure to pop it in if you're online. That's so interesting. And I love like Patrick Martin's. He's just so charismatic. I haven't heard him with that kind of rural lilt. Like what was the casting process like finding those sort of supporting characters?
Yeah, I mean, Patrick is just brilliant. He plays Porrig, and yeah, he's just a lot of the cast, and same with like Sheila Flitton as well, and Niall and Des. You know, these are really, really good, strong actors. And I think when you cast a film, you really have to go with your heart. And you know, they're very nice people to start with, which for me on set is really important. And they're just very talented. And we had Thurza King casting, and she just brought us a whole bunch of brilliant. I mean, it was a embarrassment of riches, really. And I was just very happy that we managed to pull together an ensemble of such great characters. But yeah, Patrick, I'm a big fan of.
The performances, they're very warm, they're very naturalistic, even though like there's, you know, you probably only have 1 or 2 of the kind of like extreme type characters. The everything else is kind of played very authentic. Would that have been something that you'd naturally gear towards? Would that be something you'd find in casting? Would that be something you'd discuss at the pre-production stage?
I think the tone of the comedy is very much led by Paul's writing, and Paul's performances are very naturalistic. So it's not really heightened or overly stylized. And I wanted to bring an authenticity to it where because I think Ireland in the movies, especially when it's made by people that aren't from Ireland, and we all know the obvious kind of clangers, it is you've got to approach it with a sense of authenticity. Because I wanted to make this for the Irish audience. I wanted to make sure that I wouldn't be embarrassed to show this in Ireland, but also be accessible in the US. And so tonally, you know, we did keep it naturalistic, and I didn't really give any notes on like make it bigger or you know, this, you know, make your accent a little bit stronger, or you know, we kept it really just like it's sort of set to the West Coast. Paul's delivery and his kind of comedy again is quite naturalistic. It's very human. And I think when you're playing in a scene with him, I think actors respond to that appropriately, and that's how the tone is set. It's not really I don't think it's a science. I think it's just a sort of feel and a mood that we come to during a bit of rehearsal.
And lovely. And I think it kind of speaks to those themes, the West Coast looking out into the Atlantic, and, you know, out towards America. And I think that like kind of warm ethos around peace and about kind of kindness, and these 2 brothers that are feuding, and, you know, ultimately it's not too much of a spoiler, but like, you know, trying to find it is a warm family comedy, but, you know, trying to kind of connect after all these years. Talk to me about those deeper themes of peace. I mean, these are 2 Jewish brothers that had separated, one traveling across to America and one settling and meeting an Irish woman. And these are the grandkids of them. Talk to me about working those deeper themes into the story and the practicalities of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the script hadn't really changed dramatically since 2017. which is when I think I got it in 2018. And, there has always been a problem with people in the sense that there has always been wars, and they're predominantly male-led. So the script itself was always it was a reflection of a broader history rather than specifically what we're going through today, because the world is quite a different place from 2018 for a whole number of reasons that we know, to do with like pandemics and everything that's going on in the Middle East and everything that's going on in America
and Russia.
When we watched the film at the first screening in LA at SAG, I was sat next to Paul, and we both looked at each other when there's a little scene at the top of the film where the dad is watching the news, and it's all the problems going on around the world, and they're suddenly very, very specific, to the point where it felt like we'd made the film last week. It was really pertinent. And we enjoyed that because it is a reflection on the world. And the fact that it is pertinent is really good. But I can't speak for Paul exactly, but I know that from him writing it, he didn't want to point fingers at specific places. He wanted to make a broader comment about how, from the smallest bickering with your next door neighbor, to expand that bickering between towns, to expand that bickering further between countries, and then you've got territories and borders and walls. It's fundamentally the same thing. It's people not seeing eye to eye. And I don't want to sort of put a big, heavy gloss on it and say, we should all just get on, because I know that's sort of facile and ill-informed. But I think it does come down fundamentally to, there is a problem with people that they bicker, and it's not, it's very difficult to say this because I say it does sound a bit fat. It's just not necessary. And what's interesting about the film, and again, I don't think it's too much of a spoiler, but it's sorted out by women.
That's true.
And I think it, again, that wasn't really that clear to me until the whole thing came together, and we watched it and we're like, oh yeah. And I think you can do that with a film. I think you can make a film and not really understand parts of it until you've actually made it. There's a sort of inner story that comes out that it's not, you didn't see it through lack of preparation, and you weren't not aware of it because, you're an idiot. It just resounds and it just echoes out of the cinema screen to the audience in a way that you've not heard before, because you've got a load of people listening to it and reacting to it. And it's only then that it makes sense. And I thought that was really, really important, and it was rather pleasing. But yeah, I think it is nice that it does resound today, but I would hate to say that was a very specific plan. It's just I wouldn't say a happy coincidence. It's just a coincidence.
And in terms of, the editing process, pacing, and there's some very sort of comedic beats that are fueled by the performances, but they're naturalistic. And it's so important to get those kind of setups and punchlines down, to get like the physical comedy across, and then to keep the story moving. Did much change in the edit, or like is it kind of as it was written in the script?
No, I think comedy comes from the words in the script and you imagining what it's like. Where the problem comes in filming is where you imagine what it's like making that a reality. And so, funny words are going to be funny words. And if they're said by a funny person in a funny way, it's going to be funny. Whereas if there's a situation where someone trips over something, or like in this film, Paul's character gives the middle finger to Colm and there's a back and forth, is what takes a bit of planning. And really that comes down to editing. You're right. It comes to editing, and Gareth McEwan who's the editor and my editor, because I work with him almost exclusively. He really crafts that. We work together really well as a team. And then you've got the added bonus of Paul being so knowledgeable about comedy and timing that he can also come in and we tailor it. It's really down to frames here. And it really is where it becomes an exact science. And that's where I look up to Paul, because, he has been doing this for a long time, longer than me. And so when he says, if you just take 2 frames off this, it's going to be funnier than if it's 2 frames longer. And sure enough, you do it, and it's instinctive for him and it works. And so I learned a lot from that too, because it is about being specific with humor, because it's so subjective. I will take someone's experience and he would also listen to my instinct too. So it's a really lovely collaboration.
It's so enjoyable. I would watch Colm Meaney just sit on screen and eat a Snickers bar for an hour and a half.
Great,
He's just hilarious. And the pair of them together have such a camaraderie and a great chemistry. So yeah, it's just fun.
Yeah, I mean, Colm is great. I mean, you know, I think he knows, and I don't think I'll be stepping out of place. He's a curmudgeon, but he sort of embraces that.
Very affectionate, warm curmudgeon, like.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, and I've really noticed that actually since finishing the film. I've been hanging out with him quite a lot, and he is just lovely. I mean, he's a great guy, and he's a very, very committed actor. So having him on set, again, you're sort of on your. Actors are interesting because they've got a very difficult job, which is often overlooked. It's like, oh, how difficult can it be to sort of turn up and say lines? Why do they get paid that much money just to, you know? And it is because it's a craft that is completely intangible. You have to embody this character that you're given. And if you've ever tried it yourself, even just pretending to act in front of your phone in your living room, doing a monologue, a Shakespearean monologue, you'll realize you're probably going to be absolute crap. And so to see someone like Colm on set and not see how he's working, because he doesn't, go around before the take scratching his head, saying his lines, itching his chin, thinking about how he, but he turns up and it's just within him, and he emits that character that he's playing, and that is really, really quite impressive. So when he turns up and he's on his mark, he's ready to go, and so you've got to be ready to go, and that is a good discipline to learn.
He's so fabulous. He's like the dad from The Commitments and the Roddy Doyle trilogy.
Yeah.
Like, he's so kind of ingrained in our cultural ethos that it's just so enjoyable to watch him. And then somebody else that is so iconic together. Like, I mean, Mad About You, for I'd say 3 generations of people, was like one of the best shows on TV at the time. One of the kind of most truthful, like, things. So it's wonderful to see them together, and to, like, what they build, I think it kind of feels like when you see them on screen, they've never not been together.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it, actually. And obviously, from my point of view, I'm kind of blown away to be considered to be at the helm of it. But in actual fact, getting 2 strong characters like that working together within the frame, that chemistry, you don't really direct it. You just kind of try and steer it. But I was very, very lucky to have both Paul and Colm, because they're such heavy hitters, and you sometimes, and I find this sometimes on set, is if I'm watching the monitor and I can sometimes almost phase out and think I'm watching TV and sort of forget to watch it critically. So I sometimes forget to say cut, or okay, notes from the director. I'm thinking, oh God, I don't have any notes because that was really good. I thought, I was sort of watching it like I was watching on television, which is quite an odd thing quite an odd situation to be in as a director, because sometimes if the performances aren't that strong, or I don't feel like I've got hold of the story, it's frustrating because you're watching it and you're thinking, no. Whereas watching Paul and Colm, and also the other, people like Niall Buggy and Des and Patrick, you're watching it and you're just like, oh, this is wonderful. My only note is, maybe step a bit to the left so I can see your face fully in screen. But it was a really enjoyable process from that point of view, and I'm obviously doing myself and directors down, because I'm self-deprecating a little, and I wouldn't want other directors to think that you just sit there and watch great actors act. But there are levels of involvement, and this was a level of involvement where, when they were together on screen especially, I could let them fire off together, and I wouldn't need to hold hands or cage them in or give them specific notes. I just let them do it.
Oh, and they do it so well. I think that, like, it's so fun. It's so fun and enjoyable to watch as an audience. So I hope everyone goes to see it, and
Great.
Maybe we'll see you back. So you're going to be here working on projects for a while, or you're heading away to your
I've got a couple more projects this year in Ireland, and then my next feature is supposed to be starting next year. It's the other thing with film is that no one can ever be, unless I was booked to make a Marvel movie, which I know would start on X date. With independent film, it's like it's come out in the press and I'm supposed to be starting something next April. But yeah, we'll see. It's very exciting though.
Very exciting. Okay, so we'll keep an eye out for that. Thank you so much for chatting with us, and hopefully you'll enjoy the rest of your time here.
Thank you so much for having us. And I say I appreciate people's interest in a, as Paul calls it, our little movie. And I really hope people really enjoy it too.
Thank you so much for listening in. So we are grateful to Crueless for sponsoring this episode. So make sure to check out crueless.ie to learn more about what they do and get started on the platform.